Hi, I'm curious. How many of you checked your phone first thing this morning when you woke up? Yeah, me too. And how many of you, within the first 30 seconds, consumed more human suffering than previous generations have in weeks? Threats against Iran, images from Gaza, another war, another crisis, another number so large, it stopped meaning anything. We're not living in a world war, we're living in a world at war. I can only assume that some of you feel overwhelmed. You actually would like to do something, but you don't know where to start. Maybe you think previous generations had it worse. We just need to toughen up. Or you already do something. Maybe you're donating, volunteering, or speaking up, but it just doesn't feel like enough. Or you think this is for the big organizations to fix, for the politicians, not for me. 30 seconds. And the world doesn't just reach you, it lands on your chest, and that before you had your first cup of coffee. Now, a generation ago, a conflict to reach you, it probably would have taken weeks on the other side of the world. Today, 30 seconds. And then what? Well, we put our phone down. Not because we don't care, but because we don't know what to do with the caring. I know. I've been there multiple times, feeling overwhelmed, powerless, helpless. But let me be clear. I'm not the one in those videos. I'm not the one affected by these conflicts. I'm the one watching them, and yet they still affect me. And I can only assume that they affect many of you too. So the question is no longer whether we care. It's what to do with that. Not with our guilt, but with our time, with our skills, with this generation's window. So tonight, I'm going to explore 3 things. First, a story of a man who used what he had, and with that changed what humanity protects, even in the worst of times. Second, why this is under pressure right now, and why this also matters beyond conflict zones. And third, what this means for you. Not someday, but with the time that you have. Because your skills can serve humanity. And how you utilize them is up to you. Now, this one person, his name was Henry Dunant. He was Swiss, and in 1859, he was actually on his way to meet Napoleon III to settle a land deal. However, he never made it. Instead, he walked into the aftermath of the Battle of Solferino. Tens of thousands of soldiers, wounded, half dead, almost no medical care. Henry Dunant was shocked. Now, he wasn't a doctor, nor was he a soldier, but he was a man who refused to look away. He ran into the chaos, he rallied the villagers, and got them to treat the wounded from both sides, because one radical idea took shape. A wounded soldier is no longer a fighter. He's just a human being in pain. Now, Henri didn't stop there. He wrote about what he had seen, and then he pushed governments until they listened. A few years later, 12 of those governments gathered in Geneva and agreed to something the world has never seen before. Even in wars, there are limits. Even in wars, there are lines we do not cross. Even in wars, there are rules. Out of that came the whole Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, the Geneva Conventions, and the entire body of the international humanitarian law. Now, it took many more wars, many waves of human suffering, until after the Second World War, every country in this world agreed to them. Imagine that. 196 states agreeing that even in war there are limits. Imagine that. Imagine that consensus happening today. Well, today we're actually moving quite in the opposite direction. And one of the humanity's broadest commitments achieved is also one of the easiest to erode. We're living in a time where there are 130 armed conflicts, the highest number since the end of the Cold War. Now, that number alone is already alarming, but what makes this time even more dangerous is that the rules which meant to limit that suffering are being broken openly, deliberately, and without shame. Hospitals are being bombed, and nobody investigates. Humanitarian aid workers are deliberately targeted. A world leader shares on social media that a whole civilization will die tonight, and thousands share it like a headline. Generations ago, governments denied violations. They were ashamed. Today, they openly justify them. The shame is gone, and with that, the restraint which used to hold the system in check. What was unthinkable has become normal. And that's where it stops to be only about the conflict zones, and it affects all of us, even in peaceful regions. Remember the video you saw on your phone in the morning? Well, for Henry Dunant to tell the world what he had seen, it has taken him weeks, if not months, years probably. Today, a hospital is bombed, and before the dust even settles, it's already in our screens. And it doesn't stay there. A colleague says something dehumanizing about a group of people. A child learns that the strong don't need to follow the rules. AI-generated hatred, online bullying, they're in our feeds long before they're anywhere else, and they influence how we see each other before we even meet. The space for empathy shrinks. And each time it does, it gets a little easier to look away. Now, I believe humanitarian values are like a public good. Imagine it like clean air. Nobody owns them. No company produces them. But pollute them, and slowly over time, everything starts to break down. You may not notice it until you realize the air that you've been breathing isn't the same anymore. Now, I fear that that's where we are. The same air is being polluted in the conflict zones and at our dinner tables through the same screens at the same time. And that's why I believe this is not only a job for the humanitarian aid workers. They are doing critical, essential work in the worst conditions imaginable. But they cannot protect this air alone. Not when the pollution is happening everywhere, in our dinner tables, in our conversations, in the feeds. We are all responsible for the world we want to live in. So the question is whether we want to act on that or whether we want to wait for someone else to. Because your skills can serve humanity, and how you utilize them is up to you. Now, Henry Dunant used what he had, but that was in 1859. So what does that look like today? Let me tell you about a young woman I know, Selina. Very bright, energetic young woman, and she once told me, you know, Kai, every time I read the news, I just feel heavier and helpless. That's when she joined the Circle of Young Humanitarians, and through that, got in touch with this whole humanitarian world, the values behind it, the stories, the principles. And that changed how she saw her own role. Selina, after university, took a job at one of Switzerland's biggest conferences. CEOs, decision makers, leaders gathering in one place. Her role? Shaping that program, deciding who gets a voice, who gets heard. Now, Selina did something remarkable. She invited humanitarian voices into those spaces. Picture it, 400 people, very business-driven atmosphere, and then suddenly a humanitarian delegate walks on stage. A conversation, which was predictable, shifts. People lean in. They listen. They reconsider. That's not charity. That's influence. Same job, same hours, but a completely different use of her time. That's what it looks like to use one's own sphere of influence for humanity. Not by changing the career, but by you changing what she uses, what you already have. And she's not the only one. Mérey studied environmental sciences, and through the Circle of Young Humanitarians, she organized a so-called mapathon, using satellite imagery to map places which were simply missing from the maps. Sometimes those are informal camps where nobody knew how many people actually lived there. Those maps directly went to aid organizations, helping them to respond accurately and in time. Data turning into access, access turning into lives. 1 weekend of someone's time. Not more time, the same time, but used differently. So the question is no longer whether we have time. The question is what to do with the time we already have. Now, every person in this room has something. A skill, a platform, a network, a sphere of influence. However small, everybody has something. Now, we live in a time where one person's action can travel as fast as one person's suffering. That's the other side of the digital age, right? So, if a person, Henry Dunant, can start something what humanity protects, even in the worst of times, if Mérey can draw maps which save lives, when Selina can influence what a whole room of CEOs and leaders hears, what happens when 10 people in this room do the same? 100? What happens when a whole generation decides that their skills is for something larger than for their careers? The historian Rutger Bregman calls what is missing right now a moral ambition. The decision to use your own skills, your position, your privilege in order for something larger than yourself. And then not because you're an aid worker or an activist, but because you understand that these values don't survive on their own. They survive because people like you choose to live them. And that is exactly the goal from the Circle of Young Humanitarians, to empower people to live humanitarian values and connect one's skills to humanitarian impact. And that is what I'm asking of you tonight. Not to solve everything. Not someday. Now, use what you have and trust that it matters. Tomorrow morning, first thing when you wake up, you'll probably check your phone again, just like today. And within 30 seconds, the world will land on your chest again. But maybe this time something will be different. Maybe you'll think of Henri, of Selina, or of Mérey. Maybe you'll think of your own skills, your own time, with your own sphere of influence. If you're a teacher, bring those values into your classroom. If you build technology, build it with dignity at the center. If you're a parent, raise your children to live them. Every skill in this room counts, and together they can add up to something no humanitarian system could ever achieve alone. You were never as powerless as it feels. It starts by using what you already have. Your skills can serve humanity. You just have to choose to use them. The only question is whether you will. Thank you.